What's up, everybody? Thank you so much for joining me again on another Thursday night this week. Hope you're all doing well. I apologize for not putting out a show last week. Unfortunately, my family and I came down with COVID. It looks like we're all going to be fine. So appreciate y'all being here with me tonight. Again, sorry for about last night. Couldn't even use the studio because we were trying to quarantine different parts of the houses, hoping one of us didn't catch it. Unfortunately, we all did. So I wasn't able to use that last week, but here we are for another new episode this week. I'll try and put out 2 next week so we can at least keep up with what we were doing, so you guys have 2 different contents to look at next week. But for this week, let's kick off the show immediately going into somewhat breaking news now. What happened earlier today, so I guess not really as much breaking news anymore. But out of the NFL, Carson Wentz, the former Philadelphia Eagles quarterback, now is headed to the Indianapolis Colts for a 3rd-round pick this year in the 2021 draft and a conditional 2nd-round pick next year. Now, that conditional 2nd-round pick is based off of 2 things. Number 1, if Carson Wentz plays 75% of his games next year in an Indianapolis Colts, if he starts 75% of the games next year, that conditional 2nd-round pick will now become a 1st-round pick. Or if he plays 70% of the snaps and they make the playoffs, that conditional 2nd-round pick will now become a 1st-round pick. So, in essence, the Eagles got back a 3rd-round pick this year and possibly a late, if all things goes, according to plan for the Indianapolis Colts, a late 1st-round pick at best next year. So, it's interesting. I mean, I guess, the Colts could just have a terrible season and still have him as a starter and still get that 1st-round pick away. I don't really know what we don't really know what will happen, but I imagine that's not going to be the case. He's a better quarterback than Phillip Rivers is. So, I mean, in my guess, they will make the playoffs. I'm making a formal prediction right now because we're in February and the season won't even start, at least preseason, if we have a preseason until August. So, we're not even jumping into that. But at best, you're probably looking at a late 1st-round pick. And then if none of those things happen, let's just say he gets hurt, you'll get a 2nd-round pick. That's not what the Eagles wanted. If you remember about a month ago, well, I guess not even about a month ago now. Yeah, about a month ago. We're in February. Sometimes I forget what month we're in, guys, with everything that's going on. But yeah, back in January, if you guys remember, Howie Roseman and the Philadelphia Eagles had come out in search of what they said was a Matthew Stafford type of not contract, but a trade where they wanted 2 1st-round picks for Carson Wentz. That was never going to happen. Okay, nobody was giving up 2 1st-round picks, much less 1 is what it seems like, but 2 1st-round picks for a guy that had the season that Carson Wentz had last year. That was never going to happen. And the point is that the Philadelphia Eagles didn't really have a lot of bargaining power going into this. Carson Wentz wanted out. They thought that they could appease Carson Wentz by firing, or depending on whose story you listen to, firing or Doug Peterson walking out. Either way, he's not there. But he just wanted out. And sometimes players want that. They just want a change of scenery, which, I mean, isn't necessarily a bad thing. Just isn't working out in the organization. So they really had no power. This isn't even like a Deshaun Watson situation where everybody and their mother knows Deshaun Watson wants out of Houston. But Deshaun Watson is eons, worlds, stratospheres better than Carson Wentz right now. And so even then, even if he doesn't want to be in Houston, Houston's not going to give him up for a conditional 2nd-round pick and a 3rd-round pick. They're going to at least get a 1st. They may probably get 2 at worst. So, they really didn't even have a lot of bargaining power going into this transaction, but they were wanting 2 1st-round picks. No one was going to give that. They kind of wanted what the Los Angeles Rams gave up for Matthew Stafford, but at the same time, what the Los Angeles Rams had to give up was basically just to get rid of Jared Goff as well, who even was better than Carson Wentz last year. So he's traded for that. In my mind, to be honest, guys, this is a steal for the Indianapolis Colts. I thought the Indianapolis Colts have to give up their 1st-round pick this year and probably a 2nd next year. And I thought that would probably have been fair compensation. If not a 2nd and probably another 3rd. Let's just say a 3rd this year, a 1st this year, and a 2nd next year. But the fact that they didn't even technically give up a 1st-round pick yet, this is a steal for the Indianapolis Colts. So, yeah, I mean, let's take this, kind of from the Eagles standpoint. Carson Wentz was bad this year. I don't know what happened. He regressed horribly, was off timing on routes with his receivers, throwing inopportune picks, looked just completely lost as a starting quarterback. He just didn't look like he knew where to go with the ball. It looked like if you put me, granted, he did a heck of a lot better than I would ever do even in this season. But it looked like if you put me in an Eagles uniform and said, here, go take snaps, I wouldn't know what to freaking do. And it looks like Carson Wentz looked like a deer in the headlights last year. He was just not good. And then Doug Peterson elects to go midway through the year with Jalen Hurts. I believe it was an injury that allowed Jalen to slip in. He started playing a little bit pretty well, so they let him finish out the year up until the last game of the season. We'll get to that in a second. But Doug Peterson elects to go with Jalen Hurts, who has a better year than Carson Wentz, but there's a rave about Jalen Hurts that I understand to an extent. He is a really good player, or a pretty good player, but he's not the second coming of anybody right now. If you look at his stats in 4 starts last year, now he played in other games, but in 4 starts, he had just over 1,000 yards, so 1,061 yards on 52% completion percentage. That's not good at all. The benchmark in the NFL for a good starting quarterback is at least, the floor is 60%. He's well below 60%. He threw 6 touchdowns against 4 interceptions. He did add that extra layer. Now, Carson Wentz is not super mobile, but he's a mobile quarterback. But he did actually make that extra layer of a mobile quarterback. Gave the defenses a little bit more to think about with 354 yards rushing and 3 touchdowns. So, Hurts played well for a rookie quarterback. Now, he's not, the next greatest thing in the NFL, like the Eagles will probably want you to believe, or some pundits in the internet may want you to believe. Jalen Hurts is a pretty good quarterback, but he's not great right now. So they really didn't have an option, like going into 2021, with a new coach coming in, and Nick Sirianni, I believe that's how you say his last name, that it looked like it was being a quarterback battle, but at the end of the day, Carson Wentz is more talented than Jalen Hurts. So I thought he was going to win that battle. Well, he gets traded, but Hurts did provide a spark, and though his numbers, usually weren't super great, it was the right move in the time because of how bad Carson Wentz was playing. I have no idea what happened to Carson Wentz in 2020. Not a clue. Ultimately, at the end of the year, the Eagles fired Doug Peterson after questionable decisions. And, we talked about just 2 minutes ago when I mentioned the last game of the year. I assume you don't, forget about this right now because it's only been about 2 months. But do y'all remember the last game of the year? Okay, they were playing the Washington football team. I almost called them the Redskins, but caught myself. The Washington football team. And the Giants wanted the Eagles to win because if the Eagles won, the Giants are going to the playoffs. If the Washington football team won, they were going to the playoffs. The Eagles were basically playing spoiled. Can I spoil this team's season? Well, I think it was the late third quarter, Doug Peterson decided to pull Jalen Hurts for Nate Sudfeld. No one knows why. Doug Peterson, said it was his decision. That's what he wanted to do. Felt like it would be the best chance to win. I don't understand how you ever see that. Nate Sudfeld was not giving you any chance to win that game. I have no idea what he was doing. Now, the overall thought process is, at the beginning of that night, going into the game against the Washington football team, the Philadelphia Eagles were sitting at the 9th draft spot for the 2021 NFL draft. By losing that game, they jumped to the 6th draft spot. It's tanking. We talk about it all the time. Teams tank for Trevor, tank for Tua, tank for Joe Burrow, tank for yada yada, whoever it is going into the year. This was the most blatant form of a coach tanking a game that I've ever seen watching the NFL. Teams, it's always said, front offices tank, players don't tank. Why? Because they have something worth fighting for, because they have to fight for their contract. This is their livelihood. Doug Peterson was tanking. There is no other reason why you put Nate Sudfeld into the starting lineup over Jalen Hurts if you're not trying to tank. That just doesn't happen. So he puts him in there at the end of the year. I remember talking to a couple buddies of mine, and I told them, I pinpointed this. I said, listen, I'm not saying Doug Peterson's going to be fired. I didn't think he was going to be fired at the end of that year. What I did say was this. He already started to lose the locker room. When he was fired, there were reports coming out by Yahoo News that players are angry at his decision. Specifically, if you go and listen to the center Jason Kelsey's interview after the game, he was really upset about this as well. But there were multiple reports, and the one I'm talking about specifically came from Yahoo News, was players were super angry that Doug Peterson decided to pull Hurts in favor of Nate Sudfeld. And not only that, there were other reports and other outlets that were saying that Doug Peterson was mad at the front office because the front office was trying to control him, and Doug Peterson didn't want that. Doug Peterson thought that he should be able to do whatever the hell he wanted to do, basically, and ultimately ended up in a terrible divorce. Doug Peterson's gone. Nick Sirianni's coming in, And, I mean, it just, again, I didn't think that was going to happen, but I remember pinpointing to that game, and I told the guys that I was talking to at the time, they were like, well, we don't think he's going to be fired. I said, I'm not saying he'll be fired either, because, again, I didn't think he would be. But what I did say was that when he is fired one day, you can point back to this game. Why? Because when you lose the locker room, it's so hard to get the locker room back. Ask any player that's ever played on any level in any sport. When you lose the locker room, you have no respect for the coach that's coaching you, you're done. It happened to Matt Patricia in Detroit this year and just happened to Doug Peterson here in Philadelphia. So it came as a shock to me again that he got fired, but I knew this is a pinpointed moment. Why? Because he was already having problems with the locker room, and then it came to find out that you were having problems with the front office, so he's out, right? So 2020 year was a bad year for everybody. The Eagles definitely had their own fair share of problems. Nonetheless, now they currently have the 6th overall pick in the 2021 draft, but now they have a decision to make, right? So out goes Doug Peterson, in comes Nick Sirianni, and now he and Howie Roseman will have to decide what they're going to do. So they own the 6th overall pick, right? So they're in danger of not landing. Well, no other team outside Jacksonville is going to land Trevor Lawrence. They're not trading that pick. I don't even think for a Kings or Rams. I do not think that you can call Jacksonville right now and offer them 3 first-round picks. I do not think they would take it. I don't. I think they have Trevor Lawrence. I think Trevor Lawrence is already shopping for houses in Jacksonville. He and his fiance are already looking down there. He's going to go there. But what you are going to possibly miss out on, because the Jets could take a quarterback, Miami's not going to take a quarterback, even though there have been reports that they're not necessarily happy with Jalen Hurts. I think that's pretty much, bogus to an extent. And so, I mean, they're going to ride with Tua. So that takes out a spot. But the Atlanta Falcons will probably take a quarterback there if, the guy they want is available. So at that point, the Eagles are sitting at the 6th spot and could lose out on Justin Fields and Zach Wilson and Trevor Lawrence. So now they have a decision to make. So do they stay at the 6th overall pick and take Jamar Chase, Devontae Smith, Rashawn Slater, Caleb Fairley, Patrick Surtain, Michael Parsons? Do they, go that route? Do they trade back? Do they take a guy like Kyle Pitts to replace Zach Ertz, who will also be traded at some point in this offseason? I do not think that he'll play another down for the Philadelphia Eagles. But so they could go in a myriad of different places in this draft. But what they could also do is they could look at their quarterback situation and say, you know what? We may believe in Jalen Hurts, but what if we don't? What if we saw on film that Jalen Hurts isn't who we thought he was, or possibly he is who we thought he was, which is a good, capable starting quarterback in the NFL, but will never be in the upper echelon of quarterbacks. So while we're at right here, can we trade up? So who do you trade up with? Do you trade up if you really want Zach Wilson to number 2 in the Jets? Or do you try and trade up with Atlanta to take the quarterback of the future? And so you're not going to have to give up multiple. You might have to give up multiple. Yeah, you're going to have to give up multiple first-round picks to get to the Jets spot. I don't know if you will to get to Atlanta spot. You may have to give up your 6th, your 2nd this year, and your 2nd next year. There's a trade chart that Jimmy Johnson came out with a long time ago, the former head coach of the Dallas Cowboys, that still is currently being used today. So I have to look that up, and I'll get back with you guys about what the value is in that trade. But you could trade up, and possibly it was reported, not reported, I'm sorry, it was talked about on Twitter the other day, which isn't necessarily, you can find some cool, ideas. Some of them ideas are crazy. But it was talked about that what if they offered the Atlanta Falcons, Jalen Hurts, their 6th overall pick, and their next 2 seconds to jump up to number 4. That could be intriguing. Atlanta may be looking for a quarterback, and if they like Jalen Hurts enough to at least sit him behind Matt Ryan for another 3 years, maybe they do that. Who knows? But right now, they have to make a decision. Howie Roseman, Nick Sirianni will have to make a decision on whether or not Jalen Hurts is going to be their starting quarterback next year. If he's not, and if they're not sold on him, they will take a quarterback going into the 2021 NFL draft. It just depends on who. Now, just because Justin Fields, Zach Wilson, and Trevor Lawrence will likely all be gone, one of those is a possibility he falls if, Miami takes a wide receiver and Atlanta takes the number 1 tackle, Penei Sewell, or possibly trades out of that pick or possibly gets Micah Parsons. There's a chance maybe Justin Fields or Zach Wilson can fall to the Philadelphia Eagles, but really I think those 3 quarterbacks are going top 5. And if they sit there, then they may get a guy, another product out of North Dakota State University in Trey Lance, who has a ton of upside. He just is only one starting quarterback or one starting season to his career, which is worrisome, even though in that season he threw for 28 touchdowns and no interceptions, had a high completion percentage, and looked like an excellent quarterback and can run and is very athletic. Do they go that route again? Who knows? I don't think they do. I don't think they go back to the FCS route and take a quarterback from the exact same college that Carson Wentz came from, unless Howie Roseman just really loves Trey Lance. So I think they trade up in this draft to take a quarterback to at least learn under Jalen Hurts, if not take the job for him right from the get-go. So I would look for them to possibly move up into the Atlanta Falcons scenario, only because we don't really know what Atlanta's going to do right now. So I would look for in the future, in the next month or two, the draft's not until April, of the Philadelphia Eagles being on the phone with multiple teams in the top 5 to try and see who can they move up. Well, we'll say 2 through 5 because they're not moving up to 1, where they'll move up in the future. For Indianapolis specifically, I don't want to, sorry for spending so much time on this, but for Indianapolis specifically, they get a guy who he had a bad year. It was terrible. We talked about that. But I, like Chris Ballard, the GM in Indianapolis, like Frank Reich, the head coach, believe Carson Wentz still has his best football ahead of him. He's got a great arm. It's one of the best arms in the league. And he's very mobile in the pocket. I have no idea what happened this year. It just may have been a bad year. And it may have been a weird year. But if you remember, Carson Wentz led a team with with his 3rd and 4th string wide receivers, guys that are being brought off the practice squad in 2019, led them to the playoffs. Now, albeit in a terrible NFC East, that's also been terrible for most of this decade, but he led them to the playoffs with practice squad receivers in 2019. That's hard to do. And his two starting running backs, Miles Sanders and Boston Scott, were injured in and out of the lineup, and his best option, which is Zach Ertz, was there, but you can't, rely on a tight end being your number 1 receiver the entire time. So carrying that team to the playoffs the way that he did and putting them on his back was very impressive. And then, if you also remember, the same season back in 2017 when the Eagles won the Super Bowl, Carson Wentz was the leading MVP candidate going into the game against Los Angeles before he tore his ACL in that game. And guess who was the offensive coordinator for the Eagles during that time when they eventually did go on and win the Super Bowl? It was Frank Reich. And guess what happened when Frank Reich left to take over Indianapolis? The Eagles' offense went downhill pretty quickly, actually, as we have seen. So was he the mastermind? Was Doug Peterson the mastermind? It appears that Frank Reich had a lot more to do with that offense than meets the eye, basically, or that is led to believe. Because his offenses in Indianapolis have not really been that bad. And he had Andrew Luck before Andrew Luck got hurt and retired. And he went to his backup quarterback, Jacoby Brissett, who started out the season as a starter really, really well, and then kind of somehow, some way faltered at the end. And then he just led or helped Phillip Rivers, who was not a bad quarterback by any means, but he really wasn't what he used to be. And the Los Angeles Chargers moved on from him in favor of Tyrod Taylor and Justin Herbert, and still led him to a 10-6 season going into the playoffs and almost beating Buffalo. So Carson Wentz is a lot better than Phillip Rivers. He's a lot better than Jacoby Brissett. He's not better than Andrew Luck, but again, Andrew Luck's not coming back, even though there was yet another report on Twitter whether or not Andrew Luck would return. Guess this answers that question. He's not coming back. But, Carson Wentz, I think Frank Reich can help him in the issues that he had. I think he'll slow down the offense. I think this is going to be better for Carson Wentz's mental capacity, or mental health, I guess you can put it, with going into a new change of scenery, with a new team. He'll have his old head coach that he loved and played really, really well for, again, being the leading MVP candidate, would have won it that year had he not got injured. They may, but this team is also just built so much better than the Eagles are. The Eagles have a problem at wide receiver. They have J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, who is not bad, but he's not your number 1 guy. He's more best suited to be probably your 3 or 4 guy. Then you have a guy they just took last year in Jalen Reagor, but you have an aging Deshaun Jackson, you have an aging Alshon Jeffrey, who both have had injury issues. You're not going to have Zach Ertz, even though Dallas Goedert is a really good tight end. So, Zach Ertz is still one of the better tight ends in the NFL right now. So you're probably going to lose Alshon Jeffrey, Deshaun Jackson, and Zach Ertz this year. And even if you keep them, you can't trust that 2 of those 3 are going to stay healthy. So looking at the Indianapolis Colts, they might add another receiver. T.Y. Hilton is a free agent. I don't know if he'll come back or not. I really don't know what his value is on the open market. But they could land a guy like Allen Robinson, who I think people sleep on. I think he's one of the best receivers in the league. They could land him. They can go out and get a trade for somebody. They could take a guy in the draft. But right now they have Michael Pittman, who in his own right, in his rookie season from USC, played really, really well. And it looks like a bright spot for that offense. And then you have a guy, I don't know why I'm burping that guy, sorry. But if you have a guy named like Paris Campbell, who is a burner, who can be the speed guy on your offense, and if he can stay healthy, which he wasn't really healthy last year, then you have options there. But not only that, you have a dominant offensive line, the best offensive line in the NFL. You have a dominant defensive line with a guy like Forrest Buckner, who played really, really well in his first season with Indianapolis this year. And then you can add on pieces to that. So whether you add, and you have your first round pick this year. That's the crazy thing, is you have your first round pick. So you're not going to get, you're not going to get Kyle Pitts, Devontae Smith, or Jamar Chase, or maybe not even Jalen Waddle, but there are other guys in this draft that can help this team out and probably perform at a really high level. I'm looking at you, Rashad Bateman, so out of Minnesota. So it depends. They can go in a myriad of different ways, but this team is built really, really well, and they are a quarterback away from making some serious noise in the AFC. Now, you're still going to have to contend with Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills. You're still going to have to contend with Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. But this team can keep up with those teams. That's how well this team was built by Chris Ballard, who's one of the better young GMs in the entire league, and Frank Wright, who has been a really, really good coach for them in the past. So we sign off with this, guys. I don't know who you're a fan of. I won't tell you who I'm a fan of. I'm going to try and keep everything unbiased as much as I can. But imagine, you have your deepest rival. So imagine let me think of a team right now. Oklahoma, right? And imagine you see on Twitter or Facebook or wherever you get your sports news at, that there's an idea that maybe we shouldn't play, maybe we should play Ohio State every year. Let's play Ohio State every year. How would you feel about that? Yeah, that's a fun thing, right? Like, we all want to see not rivalry games, we all want to see big out of conference games. But why on earth would you do that if you're Oklahoma? Why? We saw when they played against Ohio State that Baker Mayfield won one game and Ohio State won another one game. They split those two games and effectively hurt each other's chances for the college football playoff. And in a college football playoff committee where records are basically dominant, they tell you strength of schedule is one thing, they tell you conference championships are one thing. The records are what keep you into the game. If you have 2 losses, you're not making the college football playoff. So I say all that to say this. Recently, I've been seeing there's been a discussion about the possibility of the University of Georgia removing Georgia Tech from their schedule. Now, this isn't coming from the schools. This isn't coming from Georgia Tech. This isn't coming from the brass at Georgia. This isn't coming from the SEC. This isn't coming from the ACC. This isn't even coming from ESPN, from CBS, from Fox Sports, wherever you're getting your major news sites at. This really isn't where this is coming from, but it was brought up by an idea by a guy that I follow on Twitter, that I keep up with, that I've talked to in the past, but his name is Mike Griffith out of Dog Nation, who covers Georgia. And his thought process was that it's based on the idea that strength of schedule is more important, and that Georgia Tech basically does nothing for you because they're not good enough to compete with you. And so it's basically a guaranteed win every year. Whereas if you played a team like Clemson, it would look better in the eyes of the committee in the future. And especially if you win that game, you may be able to lose your conference championship game and still be put in the playoff based only off of winning that game. Or if you have a good enough record. Now, obviously he's not saying if you go and lose 3 or 4 games and you beat Clemson, you're going to get in. No, but he's basically saying that strength of schedule will help you. I'm here to disagree. I get that idea. I really do. Strength of schedule is a big thing, and I, for one, love seeing marquee matchups. For instance, week 1 this year, we are getting Clemson versus Georgia. We are getting Alabama versus Miami. We were supposed to get Texas LSU again last year, but we didn't get that. But, in the future, you're going to have more games, more big out-of-conference games, and those are more fun for everybody. I get that. For the fan of college football, I would love to see Alabama and Ohio State play every year. I'd love to see Georgia and Oklahoma play every year. I'd love to see Texas and Florida play every year. Or I'd love to see Clemson and USC play every year. These games will be a lot of fun to watch, but they don't make any sense to these schools. Why would they do that? So, for instance, It's a rivalry game for Georgia specifically. Let's just go back to the Georgia versus Georgia Tech specifically. It's a rivalry game that's basically been played every year since 1893, excluding a couple of years, especially last year when obviously we only played a conference schedule. Each conference only played a conference schedule. So, yes, Georgia has dominated the series lately. I think they've lost 3 games over the last 20 years. But this is an important game between the engineering-based state school in Atlanta and the ag-based school in Athens. They're the 2 biggest schools in the state, and they play for the Governor's Cup. Do you think that when Georgia gives up on this game and goes plays Clemson, they're going to play for the Governor's Cup? I don't even think that the legislation will allow them to do that. They will fight for Georgia to play Georgia Tech because, I mean, is the Governor's Cup just going to flip back and forth? Or is what, one year it's going to say Brian Kemp of Georgia. I'm not sure who the South Carolina governor is right now, but is it just going to flip back and forth? No, that's not going to happen. And these legislations are going to fight for this, and neither school is going to fight against this, really. But based on that, based on the history in the rivalry game, Clemson and Georgia aren't even rivals. They were at one point way long ago because they played each other all the time. And yeah, maybe you can assume that rivalry, but Georgia doesn't have rivals with every team in the country. I mean, if you start up a series every year with Oklahoma with Georgia, that eventually might become a rivalry. That rivalry's right now. So why are you taking away from that? And I get the idea, well, that's a guaranteed win. So that brings me on into number 2. Why on earth would either one of these schools trade that? If it's a guaranteed win, both schools are having a guaranteed win against a Power 5 strong in essence, but a Power 5 school in a good conference, right? So Georgia plays Georgia Tech. Georgia's in the SEC. Georgia Tech is in the ACC. Clemson plays South Carolina. Clemson's in the ACC. South Carolina's in the SEC. Those mean something. It means more because you're playing Power 5 teams. So what, do you switch that game out and then just let the whole entire schedule go to the way that it normally has been and just flip that to the end of the year? And then if you're those 2 teams, because that game's at the end of the year, then do you just say, well, usually those 2 teams use that game as a tune-up for their conference championship game the following week. So if you're asking Clemson, okay, now you're going to play Georgia before you go into your conference championship game against Miami, North Carolina, if Notre Dame ever joins a conference at Notre Dame, or if you're Georgia, hey, by the way, before you go play Alabama next week, you might be 10-0, but you're going to have to play a top 4 team in Clemson this week and a top 4 team in Alabama next week. Why would they do that? Why? Or you can tell them, hey, Clemson, you can go play South Carolina this week, and you're a better football team than them. They are still a Power 5 team. You're going to win that game, and then you're going to go play for the ACC championship game. And if you're Georgia, hey, you're 10-0, about to be 11-0, or I'm sorry, I got that schedule mixed up. It's 11-0, about to be 12-0. But you're going to go play Georgia Tech right quick, and then you're going to go play Alabama or Auburn or whoever it is on the other side in the SEC championship game. So, but why would they, why in the world would either team decide to trade an easier win in a Power 5 game for each other when it could flip back and forth? Georgia's a very good team, and they will be a very good team under Kirby Smart. Clemson's a very good team, and they will be a very good team under Dabo Swinney. Why would they do that? At what point do they have to do something like that? Or what decision would they make in their mind to think this is a good thing for them? Especially when these 2 schools know that the committee values your record. If you lose 2 games, if Georgia goes in that game 10-1, for example, and Clemson's 11-0, and Clemson beats Georgia, Georgia's effectively out of the college football playoff. They are. Why would they do that? Now flip the tables. What if Georgia's 11-0 and Clemson's 10-1 going into that game, and Clemson loses that game? Now they're out of the college football playoff. Why would they do that? And so the argument is, well, Georgia Tech does nothing for you. Yes, it does. If you're dominating that series, that's not Georgia's fault they're dominating that series. That's not Georgia's fault they recruit better than Georgia Tech. Go recruit better. Go find better coaching. They dominated the series because of the better football team, and it's in a Power 5 game, and it's a rivalry. It's a rivalry for Clemson and South Carolina. It's a rivalry for Georgia and Clemson, or Georgia and Georgia Tech. So why would they do that? So at the end of the day, I get the sentiment behind the idea of your strength of schedule should be better. Yeah, no one enjoys watching Cupcake November. That's what, the pundits call it, because all the SEC teams only play 8 conference game schedules. There's a reason why they only play 8 conference games, is because the committee relies on the record so much. Why on earth would you call upon a out-of-conference tough game when you can play UAB, or you can play Arkansas State and get an easy win, keep your team healthy, and move into the ACC championship game. So why would they do that? They're not going to do that. Now, the issue with the only reason this would change and be legitimately discussed is if we expand the college football playoff. Because if you expand the college football playoff and allow for teams to lose maybe 1 or 2 games in the regular season and expand it to 8, 12, 14, or 16, then you will start seeing where strength of schedule matters more. Because then Georgia's not going to get away with playing for instance, look at their schedule this year. They have a tough game against Clemson. They have a tough game against Florida. Outside of that, they have a Kentucky team who's starting a brand new quarterback. Well, Joey Gatewood had 1 start in his career, but a brand new quarterback. South Carolina has a new head coach. Vanderbilt has a new head coach. Arkansas, who's not a good, who played better last year, but they're not on par with Georgia's schedule. And you have on down the list multiple new coaches or multiple new starting quarterbacks. Their schedule is easy this year, and so if Georgia had to rely on their strength of schedule, maybe it's not the greatest this year, but at the end of the day, all they care about is getting to 1 or less losses for them to win and go into the college football playoff. So why would they change that? And that's the reason why they have an 8-game conference schedule now. So if you expand the playoff, that's different. Maybe then you can have a Georgia-Oklahoma game like we'll have in the future, or a Georgia-Ohio State game like we'll have in the future, or a Clemson-Georgia game like we'll have in week 1 this year, or Miami-Alabama, or Alabama-Texas, or Alabama-Michigan, or Ohio State-Florida. We'll have more of these games when the expansion happens and records aren't everything, because they are everything right now. They are. So at the end of the day, like I get the sentiment that Mike is trying to put out. I just disagree heavily. Georgia Tech does something for you. What do they do for you? They give you a win over a Power 5 team. What does South Carolina do for you? They're not normally ever going to beat Clemson. Clemson has dominated that game for most of this decade. So what do they do for Clemson? Well, it gives Clemson a Power 5 win. Looks good on the schedule. It's easier opponent. Goes into their conference championship game the next week, not beat up or not off of a loss from a top 5 team. Simple, guys. This shouldn't even have to be talked about, really. But, in the future, as a fan of college football, man, I would love to see it. I think it's dumb because it's not going to happen in a 14 college football playoff atmosphere that we live in today. Maybe that changes 3 or 4 years ago, or 3 or 4 years from now. But yes, as the fan in me, sure, that would be a lot more fun, but it's never going to happen in the future. It's never going to happen in this moment until we expand the college football playoff. With that said, guys, I appreciate each one of you listening and joining in tonight. I hope you guys had a great time. Next week, I will try and put out a couple videos, maybe one on Tuesday and one on Thursday, so that I can make up for missing with you guys last week on Thursday. Should be back here in the studio. Again, this is the Between the Tackles podcast. I'm your host, Alex Joyce. I appreciate you guys spending your time with me tonight. Have a good weekend, and I'll see you guys next week.